Chapter 7. In the morning I called for the kellner and told him to make out a separate bill for me. My room was not such an expensive one as to make me feel alarmed and anxious to leave the hotel. I had 16 Friedrich's door, and there perhaps was wealth. Strange to say, I have not one yet, but I behave, I feel and think like a rich man, and cannot imagine anything else. In spite of the early hour, I intended to go at once to see Mr. Astley at the Hôtel d'Angleterre, which was quite close by, when suddenly de Grieux came in to me. That had never happened before, and, what is more, that gentleman and I had for some time past been on very queer and strained terms. He openly displayed his contempt for me, even tried not to conceal it, and I had my own reasons for disliking him. In short, I hated him. His visit greatly surprised me. I at once detected that something special was brewing. He came in very politely and complimented me on my room. Seeing that I had my hat in my hand, he inquired whether I could be going out for a walk so early. When he heard that I was going to see Mr. Astley on business, he pondered, he reflected, and his face assumed an exceedingly careworn expression. De Grieux was like all Frenchmen, that is, gay and polite when necessary and profitable to be so, and insufferably tedious when the necessity to be gay and polite was over. A Frenchman is not often naturally polite. He is always polite, as it were, to order, with a motive. If he sees the necessity for being fantastic, original, a little out of the ordinary, then his freakishness is most stupid and unnatural, and is made up of accepted and long vulgarized traditions. The natural Frenchman is composed of the most plebeian, petty, ordinary, practical sense. In fact, he is one of the most wearisome creatures in the world. In my opinion, only the innocent and inexperienced, especially Russian young ladies, are fascinated by Frenchmen. To every decent person, the conventionalism of the established traditions of drawing-room politeness, ease, and gaiety are at once evident and intolerable. "I have come to see you on business," he began, with marked directness, though with courtesy. "And I will not disguise that I have come as an ambassador, or rather as a mediator, from the General. As I know Russian very imperfectly, I understood very little of what passed yesterday, but the General explained it to me in detail, and I confess—" "But listen, Monsieur de Grieux," I interrupted. "Here you have undertaken to be a mediator in this affair. I am, of course, an Ushitel, and have never laid claim to the honor of being a great friend of this family, nor of being on particularly intimate terms with it, and so I don't know all the circumstances. But explain. Are you now entirely a member of the family? You take such an interest in everything and are certain at once to be a mediator." This question did not please him. It was too transparent for him, and he did not want to speak out. "I am connected with the General partly by business, partly by certain special circumstances," he said dryly. "The General has sent me to ask you to abandon the intentions you expressed yesterday. All you thought of doing was no doubt very clever, but he begged me to represent to you that you would be utterly unsuccessful. What's more, the Baron will not receive you, and in any case is in a position to rid himself of any further unpleasantness on your part. You must see that yourself. Tell me, what is the object of going on with it? The General promises to take you back into his home at the first convenient opportunity, and until that time will continue your salary, vos appointments. That will be fairly profitable, won't it?" I retorted very calmly that he was rather mistaken, that perhaps I shouldn't be kicked out at the Baron's, but on the contrary should be listened to, and I asked him to admit that he had probably come to find out what steps I was going to take in the matter. "Oh, Evans, since the General is so interested, he will, of course, be glad to know how you are going to behave and what you are going to do." I proceeded to explain, and he began listening, stretching himself at his ease and inclining his head on one side towards me, with an obvious, undisguised expression of irony on his face. Altogether he behaved very loftily. I tried with all my might to pretend that I took a very serious view of the matter. I explained that since the Baron had addressed a complaint of me to the General as though I were the latter's servant, he had in the first place deprived me thereby of my position, and secondly had treated me as a person who was incapable of answering for himself and who was not worth speaking to. Of course, I said, I felt with justice that I had been insulted. However, considering the difference of age, position in society, and so on, I could scarcely restrain my laughter at this point. I did not want to rush into fresh indiscretion by directly insisting on satisfaction from the Baron, or even proposing a duel to him. Nevertheless, I considered myself fully entitled to offer the Baron, and still more the Baroness, my apologies, especially since of late I had really felt ill, overwrought, and, so to say, fanciful, and so on. However, the Baron had, by his applying to the General, which was a slight to me, and by his insisting that the General should deprive me of my post, put me in such a position that now I could not offer him and the Baroness my apologies, because he and the Baroness and all the world would certainly suppose that I came to apologies because I was frightened, and in order to be reinstated in my post. From all this it followed that I found myself now compelled to beg the Baron first of all to apologize to me in the most formal terms, for instance to say that he had no desire to insult me. And when the Baron said this, I should feel that my hands were set free, and with perfect candour and sincerity I should offer him my apologies. In brief, I concluded, I could only beg the Baron to untie my hands. "Fie, how petty and how far-fetched! And why do you want to apologize? Come, admit, monsieur, that you are doing all this on purpose to vex the General, and perhaps you have some special object. Mon cher monsieur, pardon, j'ai oublié votre nom, Monsieur Alexis, n'est-ce pas? But excuse me, mon cher Marquis, what is it to do with you? Mais le General. But what about the General? He said something last night that he had to be particularly careful, and was so upset, but I did not understand it. There certainly is a particular circumstance. De Grieux caught me up in an insistent voice in which a note of vexation was more and more marked. You know Mademoiselle de Comminges? That is, Mademoiselle Blanche? Why, yes, Mademoiselle Blanche de Comminges, and Madame sa mère. You see for yourself, the General... In short, the General is in love. In fact, the marriage may be celebrated here. And fancy, scandal, gossip. I see no scandal or gossip connected with the marriage in this. But le Baron est irascible un caractère prussien, vous savez. Enfin, il fera une carrière d'allemand. With me, then, and not with you, for I no longer belong to the household. I tried to be as irrational as possible on purpose. But excuse me, is it settled, then, that Mademoiselle Blanche is to marry the General? What are they waiting for? I mean, why conceal this from us, at any rate, from the members of the household?
I cannot. However, it is not quite. Besides, you know, they are expecting news from Russia. The general has to make arrangements.
La babulinka. De Grieux looked at me with hatred.
In short, he interrupted, I fully rely on your innate courtesy, on your intelligence, on your tact. You will certainly do this for the family in which you have been received like one of themselves, in which you have been liked and respected.
Excuse me, I've been dismissed. You maintain now that that is only an appearance, but you must admit, if you were told, I won't send you packing, but for the look of the thing, kindly take yourself off, you see it comes almost to the same thing.
Well, if that's how it is, if no request will have any influence on you, he began sternly and haughtily, allow me to assure you that steps will be taken. There are authorities here. You'll be turned out today, que diable! Un blanc-bain comme vous wants to challenge a personage like the Baron? And do you think that you will not be interfered with? And let me assure you, nobody is afraid of you here. I have approached you on my own account because you have been worrying the General. And do you imagine that the Baron will not order his flunkies to turn you out of the house?
But you see, I'm not going myself, I answered with the utmost composure. You are mistaken, Monsieur de Grieux. All this will be done much more decorously than you imagine. I am just setting off to Mr. Astley, and I am going to ask him to be my intermediary, in fact, to be my second. The man likes me, and certainly will not refuse. He will go to the Baron, and the Baron will receive him. Even if I am an Ushitel and seem to be something subordinate and, well, defenseless, Mr. Astley is a nephew of a lord, of a real lord. Everyone knows that. Lord Pembroke, and that lord is here. Believe me, the Baron will be courteous to Mr. Astley and will listen to him. And if he won't listen, Mr. Astley will look upon it as a personal affront. You know how persistent Englishmen are, and will send a friend to call on the Baron. He has powerful friends. You may reckon now upon things not turning out quite as you expect. The Frenchman was certainly scared. All this was really very much like the truth, and so it seemed that I really might be able to get up a scandal.
Come, I beg you, he said in a voice of actual entreaty. Do drop the whole business. It seems to please you that it will cause a scandal. It is not satisfaction you want, but a scandal. As I have told you, it is very amusing and even witty, which is perhaps what you are aiming at. But in short, he concluded, seeing that I had got up and was taking my hat, I've come to give you these few lines from a certain person. Read them. I was charged to wait for an answer.
Saying this, he took out of his pocket a little note, folded and sealed with a wafer, and handed it to me. It was in Polina's handwriting.
I fancy that you intend to go on with this affair, but there are special circumstances which I will explain to you perhaps later. Please leave off and give way. It is all such silliness. I need you, and you promised yourself to obey me. Remember the Schlangenberg. I beg you to be obedient, and if necessary, I command you. Your P. P.S. If you are angry with me for what happened yesterday, forgive me.
Everything seemed to be heaving before my eyes when I read these lines. My lips turned white and I began to tremble. The accursed Frenchman watched me with an exaggerated air of discretion, with his eyes turned away as though to avoid noticing my confusion. He had better have laughed at me outright. "Very good," I answered. "Tell mademoiselle that she may set her mind at rest. Allow me to ask you," I added sharply, "why you have been so long giving me this letter? Instead of chattering about all sorts of nonsense, I think you ought to have begun with that, if you came expressly with that object." "Oh, I wanted... All this is so strange that you must excuse my natural impatience. I was in haste to learn from you in person what you intended to do. Besides, I don't know what is in that note, and I thought there was no hurry for me to give it you." "I understand. The long and the short of it is, you were told only to give me the letter in case of the utmost necessity, and if you could settle it by word of mouth, you were not to give it me. Is that right? Tell me plainly, Monsieur de Grieux." "Peut-être," he said, assuming an air of peculiar reserve, and looking at me with a peculiar glance. I took off my hat. He took off his hat and went out. It seemed to me that there was an ironical smile on his lips. And indeed, what else could one expect? "We'll be quits yet, Frenchy. We'll settle our accounts," I muttered as I went down the stairs. I could not think clearly. I felt as though I had had a blow on my head. The air revived me a little. 2 minutes later, as soon as ever I was able to reflect clearly, 2 thoughts stood out vividly before me. The first was that such trivial incidents, that a few mischievous and far-fetched threats from a mere boy had caused such universal consternation. The second thought was, what sort of influence had this Frenchman over Polina? A mere word from him, and she does anything he wants, writes a note, and even begs me. Of course, their relations have always been a mystery to me from the very beginning, ever since I began to know them. But of late I have noticed in her a positive aversion and even contempt for him, while he did not even look at her, was absolutely rude to her. I had noticed it. Polina herself had spoken of him to me with aversion. She had dropped some extremely significant admissions. So he simply had her in his power. She was in some sort of bondage to him,